Hey everybody, this is Niclas Huschenbeth and this is another game analysis of my Bundesliga weekend. I played in the German Bundesliga for the first time again after a 4-year break, and in the second game of the weekend I played against the Austrian number 1 Grandmaster Markus Ragger with a current elo I believe of 2697, so very close to the prestigious 2700 club, and he has crossed that line already before, so he is one of the strongest players in the world. So I was quite happy to play against such a strong player because you don't get a chance that often. In case you're wondering, the first game I already analyzed in a different video, you will find the link in the description, was my game against Pavel Dragubov. So let's get started with this one, I would say. So I was playing with the black pieces and Markus started with d4, and we're going into this variation where I choose the Queen's Indian, or I'm kind of hinting at choosing a Queen's Indian, but in fact what we'll see is that now I transpose to a Bogo Indian, playing bishop b4 check here, and now going c5, which is an unusual setup, but for me it has worked out so far, and there are some move order tricks here. So by playing it in exactly this move order, I'm not allowing white like all the other choice he has when I would go for the bishop b4 check here right away, which is the usual way to enter Bogo Indian. But there are also some drawbacks. I don't want to get into this too deep right now and rather focus on the game. Actually, I was quite happy to see this because it's not a line where I'll be killed in the opening, and I know that Markus is a very good opening specialist. He's a really good theoretician. I thought he would just pick one line, prepare it, because my repertoire is kind of not so wide, at least against d4, and he would just, I don't know, somehow kill me right in the opening. So I was happy to see this line, because here white maybe is a tiny bit better, but the position of black is pretty solid, and I think I really didn't have any problems here out of the opening. Alright, so what is going on here? We have this typical Bogo Indian structure. I've taken with the pawn b4, which at first sight it looks strange because you have one pawn less at the center, but this pawn can be annoying for white because it's covering some squares. And the general strategy is here, black's playing on the dark squares, obviously, since he has exchanged his dark square bishop, and I'll just put all my pawns on the dark squares, and we'll see this in the next couple of moves. So I go d6, queen b3, a5, protecting the pawn, a3, and now I go knight a6. One can also take on a3, but then white takes back with the b pawn, and this is a target also not that bad for black. Let's be honest, it's also, I think, more or less fine. Maybe in all these lines white is a tiny bit better, but completely playable positions for black. So I go knight a6, and if white now takes on b4, I'll just take back. Rook fd1, rook e8, just a useful move to put the rook here, and I want to go e5 anyway, which I actually do in the next move right here, going e5, and you see another pawn on the dark square, and I'm threatening e4 now, and Markus prevented this by going knight h4. Well, actually he did not prevent it, but at least he's not running into a fork, and I still went e4, which is kind of a double-edged move, because on the one hand, yes, I'm gaining space, on the other hand, I'm putting my pawn on a light square, and it's not clear if this pawn is going to be strong or weak. Well, I had this specific line in mind, which we will go down now. Queen e3, and now I played knight g4, and that was quite optimistic, and it is okay, but I can play possibly even better. One move is to go g6 to restrict this knight on h4, but I didn't like his bishop maybe coming to this diagonal, but even here I can go bishop c8, and this position is completely fine for me, because, well, this knight will need some time to get back into a game. Another move that is possible is to go bishop c8, same idea, not letting the knight come to f5, and playing against this knight on h4. And here probably white should go f3, and then d5. It's a very complex, rich position, and black's by no means worse. Very interesting. Just to point out real quick, knight takes e4 here doesn't work, because here white is in this pin. I don't go f5 immediately because of check. And white can't unpin with check, so it is a trick to go d5 first, so white has to block the d5 square now, playing f5, and black wins a piece. So let's go back to the game and see what I did. I played knight g4, and now queen f4 is forced, and now this was my point, now taking on f2. Queen takes f2. One important point here is that rook f1 can be answered with e3, and white cannot take on b7 because of this fork winning the queen. So Markus took on f2, now e3. That was the whole idea, to have this fork and win back the piece. The queen moves. I exchange bishops first, so my bishop isn't hanging. And then I take on d2. And this is the position I had envisioned. And I thought I'm doing quite okay here. Well, I was pretty optimistic about my position here because the white king is weak, and I thought the white pawn structure is maybe worse than mine. But it turns out I'm a little bit too optimistic. The position is roughly equal. My opponent played knight e3. And now the knight is threatening to go to d5 or f5. And I didn't want to see the knight come into d5. And also this knight on a6 is not participating in the game right now. So very natural moves to go knight c7. And he also have the idea of maybe going knight e6, knight g5, something along these lines. So Markus went d5, stopping me from going knight e6. But on the other hand, he doesn't have this d5 square available anymore. So I was happy about this trade-off. And here I played kind of a fancy move, and I'm not sure how good it is. I played b3. It's interesting, but probably it would have been better to just go back right away and aim for this square c5, where the knight is very well placed. And now, for example, rook takes d2. At some point, white has to take this pawn. And I played g6, take away this square from the white knight. And what I didn't like here was that the knight would come to d4, where the knight is very well placed, defending e2 and possibly going to c6. But it doesn't matter if the knight is coming to c6. Looks pretty there, but doesn't do much. So I can just go rook e8, queen f2, and play queen e8 or queen somewhere. Well, I shouldn't blunder this pawn, I guess. Maybe queen e8 is good. And I'm comfortable here. I'm definitely not worse, because my pawn structure is better and the knight is well placed on c5. Really, white doesn't have any obvious targets or where he's going to play, feels like to me. So let's get back to the game. I played b3. So what was my idea? Well, I didn't want to allow the knight coming to d4. You see, first I covered the c2 square, and now I covered the f5 square, so the knight isn't coming to d4. And if I get two more moves in here, knight a6, knight c5, my position is great. Just positionally speaking, just great. But the problem is that white can play some concrete moves while my knight is still kind of out of the game on c7, and that's why this position is not as good as the line we just saw. Or well, I mean, the line we just saw was better. The position is roughly equal still, I would say. So knight g4. The knight is coming to better places now. Knight f6 the threat, f5 and knight f2. And the point is white wants to go e4 as quickly as possible and open the position up. So I played knight a6. If I get knight c5 in here, another move, then I'm just doing so well. But e4. And I had seen this move, but I thought it can't be too bad. But it seems I underestimated it. I played rook e5 to be able to take on f5 the rook. He still took. And I took with the rook. And now queen e3. I had missed this move. I had only looked at the obvious move, which is to put the queen on d4 very naturally. After which I'm just completely fine here. Let's say knight c5. And no worries. If knight g4, threatening knight f8, I just go queen f8. And knight h6, I just go queen f8, cover this. Bring the next rook in, and I'm better. But queen e3, the whole point is that white is keeping another eye on the square on h6, and I suddenly realized I'm in a little bit of trouble here, because if I play the move that I would like to play, knight c5, Then he goes knight g4, and I just cannot stop knight h6, and it's quite uncomfortable suddenly. The only move is rook f8. If I go rook g5, still knight h6 is coming, and here he just plays rook f1. I can never take on h6 because of h4. He'll bring another piece in, just too many pieces attacking here, and this is game over for me. So I would need to go rook f8 here. Just to point out, this didn't happen in the game, just a sample variation I calculated. But now rook f1 is unpleasant. And it turns out I just can't get my pieces together here. So if rook takes f1, that's what I looked at. Now h5. Even here, yes, the knight is kind of dominated, but the problem is I cannot move. Here, it felt very uncomfortable for me because I cannot get out of this situation with this knight on h6, and white has control over a lot of important squares, and I didn't want to go into this being low on time. I followed my intuition here, and that was correct here. White is clearly better. In fact, here black can still save himself. Instead of going rook takes f1, you would need to find this line, which is not trivial to me. Queen d7, giving up the exchange. Point being that after rook e8, I will win back the exchange here. With knight e4, white has this move. And rook e2, and here's just one move to save it, is to go b5 to have play in the queen endgame. Very difficult line to go down to. So I'm glad I followed my intuition and didn't go for this, but I'm not glad for which move I finally chose. That was queen g5. Another problem here is that, well, white is also hitting this pawn on b3, but I should just give it up. I should play the move queen f8 nonetheless. And if now knight g4, then I can just go rook f3 and I'm fine. Knight h6, king g7, and that's just fine. So white should take on b3, but here I have good compensation for the pawn. Knight c5, queen c2, bring this rook in. Maybe I even have this option to bring the knight all over there. And this is a whole different story than what happened in the game. Here I'm a pawn down, yes, but I have great compensation. In the game I'm a pawn down and I'm like fighting for my life. So let's see what happened in the game. Queen g5, well, the problem with this move is that white exchanges queens and goes knight e4, going after my d6 pawn. I saw that, but I thought I might have chances here to hold this endgame, especially because in a lot of variations I've counterplayed with this pawn on b3. But here I made a mistake right away. I played knight c7 because I was thinking I would get into a rook endgame here, playing rook d8 next move, but this just isn't the case, and knight is so badly placed on c7. So I should play rook d8 and then go knight c5, and yes, I'm a pawn down, but I can try here to defend. It won't be easy for white to convert this. After knight c7, well, white just plays rook f1 when I cannot play rook d8, obviously, because of knight f7. And in general, there are always ideas of the knight or the rook coming to f7, and that's just a huge problem. So here I'm very close to being lost, I think, or I am lost already. So rook e7, covering the f7 squares, but white is just renewing the threat. Rook df2. Now I played a4. Knight a6 might be better, but it wouldn't really change the variation of the position. Played a4. The point was I didn't want white to play a4 when this pawn on b3 will be weak. But yeah, it wasn't really a priority in this position. Now knight f7 played, which is a good move. Rook f7 was another option I was actually expecting going into this position. Knight e8 and rook d7. And we get into this rook endgame, which is also just bad. Rook c8, rook c6. And rook b8, just bring the king close, and white will win this rook endgame with this active rook. So my opponent played knight f7, d6 the threat, so I have to move the knight. And now my opponent played g4, which is a good move. d6 was another winning move. Rook d6, rook d7, now knight h6 check, king g7, and rook f7 check, rook takes, and the knight comes back. and d7, d8 is the threat, so knight c5, but now knight e5, once again, ideas here, rook a7, and now white can just improve his position, and I cannot get any counterplay here, so this is lost. But g4 was also a move I expected, quite an unpleasant move, because suddenly white is creating like mating threats against my king as well. The idea now knight h6 followed by g5, and then the rook coming to f7 or f8. So I go king g7, which is pretty much the only move. If now g5, I can go rook f8 and still defend. And my opponent played a mistake here. He played knight g5. Also a very natural move, but turns out that then I'm pretty much back in the game, in fact. The winning continuation was d6 once again. Rook d7, and now in fact giving up this pawn, but in return white is getting 2 rooks to the 7th rank. It's just killing me here. Knight c5, rook ff7, knight e6, and two rooks on the 7th or 2nd rank, depending on which color you're playing, is pretty much always bad news. And here now knight e7, threatening knight f6, forcing me to give out the exchange, and it's lost. So knight g5, now knight c5, of course I had to stop knight e6, and I'm allowing to get to have this rook come in here, but it's not too bad. It's not too bad. If white now takes on h7, I can go knight e4. Important move. So my opponent played rook e7, and here I didn't have much time, well, which was obviously my fault, bad time management, and I missed a chance to equalize here by going rook f8. That was a good move. I played h6. After rook f8, there's just the threat of going rook f4, and white really can't cope with this easily. And one important point is if white takes on h7. Now we see exactly this, what I was talking about earlier, that in all the endgames I always have potential counterplay with my pawn on b3, because I can, if I win this pawn on b2, obviously my pawn b3 is very close to queening, and here exactly that's what we're seeing. I go after the b2 pawn and I have great counterplay. So rook f8 was the way to go. I mean, what else is there? Knight e6 I can take and go rook f4, and this rook endgame is very close to equality. I should hold this. So missed chance. I went h6, knight e6, and rook c8. And now my opponent spent a lot of time, and to my surprise he played knight d4, which is giving the win out of hand once again. There are 2 ways to win here. I think maybe the simplest would be to go rook g7 check and not take on g6 now, after which I can take on e6, take on c4, and once again I have counterplay with the pawn on b3. But go rook a7 now and just go after this a4 pawn. Very simple now. Threatening to take on c5 and taking on a4, and if I take on e6, now I cannot take on c4 because this pawn would be queening, so I need to go king g8. Now white picks up this pawn and goes after this pawn, and this will just win in sooner or later. Another winning move was to take on c5 and then go d6 here, threatening d7. I have to go king f8 and rook e6. Actually, hold on, no, this is not a line. d6 isn't too clear. No, just rook e4, just covering the pawn and then bring the king closer. That would be also really good. Alright, so neither of this happened. He went knight d4. And I had already seen this move as an option because I was very low on time. I decided to play right away here. Play king f8, which is another mistake. Knight d3 once again equalizes here. Or yeah, should equalize. We'll go down a line in a moment, and that should lead to a draw. So if white pushes the pawn now, then I can just play rook d8, d7, and king f8, and no progress to be made for white. So the best try is knight c6, and now king f8, rook e2, and rook e8. once again having this point of going after a b2 pawn. And we see this here, and turns out, well, that I have the knight trapped on b2, but I can sacrifice it. And now play b5, and I'm pretty sure this position is a draw. I'll take the pawn on d6 next move, and these pawns are just binding the white knight, and I'm pretty sure this is a draw. So let's get back to the game. The 40th move, last move to be made to reach time control. I play king f8, and he goes rook e3, and here went rook e8. In fact, missing his response. I didn't even see anything here for him, which shouldn't happen, let's be honest. You should most of the time see the moves that your opponent is making. Well, obviously white cannot exchange, because then I go knight d3 and knight takes b2 next move. And if the rook sidesteps, I can just go king g7. I have an active rook and everything's great. So white plays king f2, and I'm quite fortunate that I have a move here. I can go knight e4 check. So I was just lucky. And king e1 is forced. King e2 would run into a nasty trick. Knight c3. Once again, the fact that this pawn is helping me out here, and white cannot take, because exchange rooks and this pawn is queening. And if after king d3 there's rook takes, knight d1 check, I win the b2 pawn, and I also win the c4 pawn, because here I can still take it. And same story, white cannot take because of b2 followed by queening. So king e1 to avoid this trick, and now knight d6 going after the c4 pawn, knight d6 check, and king g8. And here rook c3 is the only way to protect the rook. Knight e4. My opponent repeated moves once, and I would be happy here with a draw, of course, still being a pawn down. And now we went rook d3 to cover the pawn from d4. And here play king f7, which is still fine, but rook c8 immediately also was good, forcing c5. And white is still a pawn up, but this constellation should give me enough play here. I mean, this is still better for white, but I'm very close to equality. I think this is holdable. So I play king f7 immediately to get my king back into the game. King d2. Now I made another mistake. I play king f6. Here I need to go rook c8 now. King c3 would run into knight b5 check. And king d3, I can play g5, take the f4 square away, and now this rook is kind of stuck on d4, and white cannot really make progress. So once again, the best move here would be to go c5 and then take on a4, and we have a similar situation we just saw, and a good drawing chance for black. So I play king f6, but now my opponent also made a mistake. He played king d3. It's better to go king c3. I want to go king e5, and I thought with this active king, I'm in a good spot here. I'm playing rook c8 next, but here white can play rook d3, the rook c8, push my king back, and play knight d4. And this sequence is quite strong, because now the rook is coming to e6. For example, knight takes c4, rook e6 check, and rook c6, and that's very good for white. So you play king d3. Now rook c8. Finally, I played it. And now it's kind of hard to make any moves here with the king of the rook, because, well, king c3 still runs into knight b5. So he played knight f4. And here I made a mistake. I went king g5. I should go just g5, which makes a lot of sense, just taking the square away from the white rook and the white knight. I'm not sure, what did I not like here? I don't know. I think knight c3, going after this a4 pawn, but here I'm of course in time to go rook f8 and rook f3, activate my rook. So that's completely fine for black. And also I looked at this variation. Maybe that's what I didn't like, but here rook f8, knight f5. Here I only looked at knight takes f5, and I saw this line, which is good for white. I believe. At least it looked pretty good when I looked at it. I don't actually know how good it is. I mean, one pawn is rook f3, just king e2. But even here, I go rook f8, rook d8, also looks fine. But it's also a good move here. Instead of knight takes f5, is h5. Knight takes c6, king takes c6, and if g takes h5, just rook f3, rook h3, and this rook endgame will be a simple draw. So yeah, g5 was the way to go. I thought I can activate my king, king g5, and I expected knight g2, of course, with the idea of pushing my king back, but I thought, okay, no problem. At least now the knight is on g2 and not e2. And I played rook e8, which is a big blunder, and after that the game is lost. I need to go back. That's the only move. King f6, and I still have drawing chance, even though it's going to be tough here. It's going to be tough, but I still have chances. After rook e8, I missed his response completely. That is rook f4, and now I'm just busted. h4 is the checkmate threat. h5 is only move, but now he's pushing my king back. He's improving. All his pieces are suddenly becoming active. He's gaining more space. It's just too much, and we'll see how this game continues. I played on for a little bit. I mean, there's still some swindling chance here, still connected to the pawn on b3, but ultimately not much to be done. I win this pawn right now. Rook e2 also wouldn't help much. White can take on g6 because of this fork, and then go knight f4. Yeah, it's just too many pawns for white and too little counterplay for me. So knight takes b2, knight e3, and that's just a very good setup for white because he has completely dominated my knight on b2. So I saw my only chance giving up the exchange here. White doesn't take back immediately because of the fork, but gives an intermediate check on b7, and now takes, and we get to this position. Well, and if white didn't have this pawn, that might be fine for me, but he has this pawn is moving, and I don't have enough counterplay with these pawns. So let's see how my opponent played this. King c6, knight d4, king c7, the king is coming closer, knight c5, and now rook b4, putting me in Zugzwang, more or less. While also threatening d7. No, hold on, not d7. It's just a Zugzwang, let's put it like that. No sensible move for me to be played. So I played a3, but now he just takes on b3. And for a brief moment I was hopeful again, but then I spotted his idea. Well, here white cannot stop the pawn from queening, but what white can do is take the pawn g6 and get my king g6. And I resigned because after a1 queen, white checkmates on h7. Alright, so here's what I wrote down after the game for the reason why I lost this game. That's also why I want to share with you, because I think most of the time I share winning games, and those are great, of course, I'm proud, but I want to share this loss because, well, it's also a great learning lesson, and for all of you, I would always take a closer look at the games you're losing, because you can just take away so much more. So here's what I wrote down. I missed too many of my opponent's moves. Queen e3 was, that's where it started. Later I missed king f2, even though that didn't matter too much. And then, well, most importantly, I guess in the end I missed this move rook f4. And yeah, I need to be more aware of spotting these moves. And then I also had bad time management. I made a lot of mistakes in this crucial phase coming up to move 40. And that was due to having too little time. So I need to play quicker. And also I didn't spot enough of resources, of better moves, obviously, and that's just connected to calculation. So queen f8 instead of queen g5 at this critical point when you play queen e3. Then later on, rook f8 instead of h6 would just equalize pretty much on the spot. And then in the end, playing g5 instead of king g5, which also makes a lot of sense, but I just played the wrong moves there. And I also asked myself, how can I improve this in the future? Well, it's a lot connected to better spotting moves, spotting the opponent's moves as well as my own ones, and a better calculation which is then directly connected to time management. If you're a better calculator, you'll also spend less time. So that's what I took away from this, and I want to share this with you guys. I hope you got something out of it. Probably it was quite a long analysis, but hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you again very soon. Goodbye.